Well, we are live. Forrest Smith, man, welcome to the future of fitness.
Thank you for having me, Eric. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you and your followers.
Yeah, it's red light. As we were just chatting, I'm generally so curious about it. I think it's not talked about. I mean, given what I've researched, and I was telling you, I've just started using a little bit right, with the red light panel. So I'm trying to, you know, figuring out for myself and, N equals one sample size over here. But, you obviously live in that world. You're a believer in the technology, what you guys are doing at your company. It seems really exciting. And yeah, so anyway, I'm going to stop talking. Let's get into you, Forrest. Maybe just give us a little bit of your background, how you got to be where you are and the company, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. My personal background has been starting startups since I was about 20 or 21, and those have kind of gotten starting, build it, and then exit in most cases. But this one's actually really a little bit closer to home for us because I having done that a few cycles, my partner and I actually met by way of talking about the same type of thing on different sides of the planet. And so what we both wanted to do was build a business that was less focused on the commercial outcome and more on the systemic impact, where we can come in and have a real meaningful impact on not just our own internal stakeholders, but on kind of the systemic outcomes for health and wellness for a larger number of people. And we spent our first 2 months together sitting down and going through and talking about how can we do that in a way that still holds us accountable. And so what has come down to in the end for us, which is our kind of true north, our compass as a company for every decision that we make, is our mission is to increase the quality of life for the largest number of people we can in the most measurable way we can. And, our first product is a neuromuscular pain and inflammation device that's working to do just that. So when we launched the company, there was really no laser therapy devices available outside of clinical settings. And I spend a ton of time in the medical literature, kind of reading behind whether it's health and performance or metabolic modeling, really things that are going to be kind of high leverage spins from a research standpoint, and that you can apply whether it's your training or diet or recovery modalities, et cetera. And one of the ones that we'd seen really powerful data around was laser therapy, but it was very limited in what was available from a product standpoint. And there's some very good clinical device manufacturers out there, like Thor Laser. James Carroll's done a great job getting these out there, and they're in many different NFL facilities or clinical level applications, but they're $30,000. And our assumption was that if people are using pharmaceuticals to treat their pain and inflammation right now, it's because they don't know how damaging those pharmaceuticals are to their physiology, and there needs to be an education around this. But B, we can actually make a systemic impact and give them an alternative if we can reduce the price, reduce the size, take these big desktop devices and make it into something that's battery driven and wearable, so that people can build habits on a day-to-day basis around reducing the pain and inflammation in their joints. And it's so our first product has been essentially around that. How do we reduce friction points for people? How do we reduce cost? And how do we provide an alternative to things, again, that in line with our mission, where there's a big gap between the technology that exists and what's been adopted and the education piece around that.
Awesome. How do you say the name of your company? How do you pronounce it?
Kineon.
For it?
It's from
Kineon.
the
Okay.
Greek for movement.
Oh, really? Oh, cool. I love that. That's cool. Can you maybe give us a little bit of history into red light therapy, laser therapy, stuff like that? Like, how long has it been around? It's always like early adopters tend to be biohackers, right? For lack of a better term in that. So maybe give us a kind of a history, and then we can get into exactly what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. So there's really good data from ages ago, hundreds of years ago, on light and how light affects things like seasonal affective disorder and people's moods. So we've always kind of known that we always had I think from a scientific standpoint, had the idea that there are photoreceptors in our body that are triggering different signaling pathways from light. One of the things that's not been there until more recently is the emitters. And so really, you didn't see kind of the modern version of this coming around until about the 1950s with the first ruby red laser. And when they had that, they did actually start doing some testing on a very limited number of people. But saw some positive benefits out of it, but nothing really happened to move that forward until the 80s, when you saw Whalen and the NASA group starting to do testing in space around. It started originally around testing red and infrared lights relative to plants. So can we grow these plants in space, and what kind of wavelengths are going to drive better outcomes from plant growth? And one of the things they noticed was the kind of just anecdotally as they were running these tests was that the astronauts who were running them had biomarkers that they were tracking that came back healthier than the ones who weren't. And so they kind of took that anecdotal piece and dove into it and started doing human testing with lasers and light therapy. And I think one of the things that we've seen more recently is that with the advent of solid state LED lighting, lasers have traditionally been more sophisticated, larger, more expensive. And because of that, less accessible from a device standpoint. Solid state or digital lighting, more accessible from a manufacturing and a cost standpoint. But there are some limitations relative to what they can do from a penetration and a dosing profile. So, we've spent really the last 5 years and tens of thousands of hours with our team digging into there's currently around 7,000 medical trials on photobiomodulation or light therapy. And there's a really good amount of data around the dosing. And one of the key outcome drivers is how you dose. How do you deliver the correct number of photons to the correct photoacceptors at the correct depth of tissue? And again, this is something where it's kind of developed from the 80s with the NASA testing and ongoing physiological trials from a medical standpoint into where we have a much more grounded or a much better grounding and kind of foundational understanding of what these triggers are and what are mediating these effects from a pain reduction, from an inflammation reduction, from a soft tissue regrowth standpoint. That there's really a lot of downstream effects that are triggered by this. And the better you understand the dosing, the more effectively you can deliver those.
So with what you guys do, Forrest, I mean, is it, and forgive my naivety here, but like, is it red light therapy? Is it laser therapy? Is there a difference? Like, what specifically do you guys do?
It's a great question. So there's a number of different terms in the medical literature even. And so what happened around, I believe, 2015, 2016 is they tried to consolidate a lot of these terms into a kind of more of an umbrella term, which is photobiomodulation. So photo light, bio, kind of your physiology, and modulation changing. So how are we changing your physiology with light? Before this, this was separated into LLLT, so low level laser therapy, RLT, red light therapy. There's a number of different kind of subcategories of this, but essentially right now we kind of roll everything under photobiomodulation. We've found that using laser therapy for treating internal tissue, so the soft tissue benefits and kind of the internal tissue treatments that we make for reducing pain and inflammation are much better suited to lasers and infrared and a couple of different wavelengths of infrared that allow us to penetrate more effectively. But one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is when we came in and we started developing our product, even the clinical level, there was a gap between the engineering side and the physiology or medical side relative to the metrics that you're measuring for kind of power levels. And so everybody was using different terms. It was very heterogeneous from a comparison standpoint. So one of the things we've seen that the research side has been doing is trying to move more towards homogeneous metrics for this. But the metrics that are being used for this are very broad. So as an example, irradiance and power density are two commonly used metrics for measuring how much power is being delivered optically. These are interesting, but there's a number of different ways you could do those. And so as an example, with our products, we had with our first, our products are modular and wearable. So with our first modules, we had slightly more powerful lasers and the same amount of power coming out totally, but we've split this into smaller lasers now. And the outcomes that we had from our observational studies were, substantially, I want to say high 20s, low 30% better from an inflammation reduction. So even within the given metrics that are in the scientific community right now, we felt that there was a gap that we could fill for how photons are delivered to the photoacceptors directly. And so we've spent a lot of our time kind of going back in and using things like Monte Carlo models from a mathematical standpoint for modeling, and then baselining in real life with metrics like nitric oxide. Serum nitric oxide is something that we use quite frequently for kind of baselining what we expect from our mathematical models from a photoacceptor trigger for signaling, versus what are we expecting and what's happening in real life. And if we're wrong, why are we wrong? Let's go fix these problems. And so again, we have not seen other photobiomodulation device manufacturers modeling the delivery of photons to that level of, resolution or care. But for us, this is what drives the outcomes. And so it's really worth it from a time standpoint to invest our medical and technical teams into building these models and then dialing them in so that we're improving these outcomes over time.
Got it. Okay. So explain it to me, the layperson of Simpleton, right? So why should I be looking at your products, your services, red light, photomodulation as a category? Like, what are the benefits, and, one of these things I'm curious about too, is I feel like people love immediate gratification with their, when they invest in stuff like this. Like they want to feel, you get a Theragun or a Hyperice, like you feel it right away, right? Like it's immediate. But this stuff, so far from my experience, it's not quite so immediate, but maybe it is for you. So yeah, explain in layperson terms, like what are the benefits here? Why should people be paying attention to this? And then, yeah, how sticky is it from a consumer standpoint?
I think that makes great sense. So one of the things that I think works best to kind of set the context for this is comparing it with existing treatment modalities. So two of the things that if you go to your doctor, it's one of the things that we fight on a daily basis is inertia. And it's kind of swimming against the tide, but hoping that we can get enough people swimming against the tide that we can turn the tide, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we've noticed is medical, and particularly with our older cohorts who have things like osteoarthritis, where you have ongoing chronic pain and inflammation that are driving degradation of tissue. The gold standard for this from a medical community treatment right now is ice and NSAIDs. And we find this very irresponsible in general, because the NSAIDs do a couple of things. One, which is directly at odds with what you'd like to do if you're taking them for chronic pain in your knee joints or in your shoulder joints, is increase the degradation rate of the actual joint over time, which is, it kind of seems like this is that should be a red flag. Just hey, this might decrease the pain for me short term, but longer term, this is going to cause my joints to degrade more rapidly. But to answer your question more directly, if people are taking NSAIDs, the laser therapy is more effective. There's been a number of head-to-head studies comparing NSAIDs and pain inflammation pharmaceuticals for particularly for inflammation-driven pain. So if you have something where there's a mechanical kind of drive for the pain, pinched nerve, the light's not going to necessarily help the pinched nerve, but that pinched nerve causes a huge amount of tissue degradation around it by having so much inflammation, by triggering inflammation. And that's really where we can actually offer help. So getting people out of pain and inflammation in a much faster, but also a much longer term and more health beneficial way. So if you're able to compare these one-on-one, and there's some very good studies, and I'm happy to kind of shoot those over as well. If you have, for example, knee osteoarthritis, your knee tissue, your cartilage in your knees is degrading faster than it would otherwise. You have a homeostatic balance in your knees for how fast you're growing this tissue versus how fast it's degrading. If you have inflammation in that synovial fluid around this tissue, then the degradation increases speed and your regrowth decreases speed. And so you just start losing this soft tissue. Laser therapy actually reverses that process. So by removing the inflammation, in the first 2 to 3 days, we see from blood draws, roughly 80% of the inflammation is reduced. And what's not reduced is actually acute inflammation that's helpful, that's beneficial to regrowth. So, the And we can dive in if you like on kind of acute versus chronic inflammation. But the long story short is that this is an investment in being able to regrow tissue by increasing the rate of proliferation for chondroblasts, which are the fast growing front edge cells of your soft tissue like cartilage or ligaments, and by decreasing inflammation dramatically. And that's not something that pharmaceuticals do. And it really, again, our hope for this was to be able to reduce the price of laser therapy devices and also make them more sticky by making them have less friction points. So we've made it so you don't have to have a big laser setup on your desktop. We've been very lucky in the technology we've been able to adopt for this. Vertical cavity surface emission lasers have made a huge leap in reducing cost and size of lasers over the past 5 years. And we've been very lucky to be able to adopt those and bring them into something that is now wearable and that can actually treat this internal tissue more effectively. And so our assumption is that if people are educated about the issue and this data is put in front of them directly, and you can say, your knees or your joint tissue is going to degrade if you keep taking these NSAIDs, but there's a solution that can reduce the pain and inflammation and actually help you with regrowth, that they're going to make rational decisions and invest in their long-term health.
Awesome. So let's maybe boil it down to like a granular example. My knees, right? My knees take a beating. I ski hard. I ski a lot. When I'm not skiing, I'm, hiking, biking, with a pack, all kinds of stuff that, as a 47-year-old, I know the first thing it's going to go is going to be my knees. It's not bad yet, but is that like if I, instead of after a long day and my knees are achy, is this something instead of like, an ice pack and maybe an Advil, I would revert to this and this would be a much better and effective option? Like how would those two things compare in the actual, short-term and long-term health of my joints?
It's what the analogy we use for this is it's putting out the fire in the kitchen versus taking the batteries out of your fire alarm. If you're taking NSAIDs, you're essentially taking the batteries out of the fire alarm. Your kitchen's still on fire. Like your knees, they may not hurt as bad, but it's the house is still burning down. And so what we'd love to be able to do is say, hey guys, let it beep. It takes a little while. To your earlier point, we see around larger joints that it takes 2 to 3 weeks for people to start seeing kind of the meaningful, what we see on average is, and I need to reference our data for the latest, but in orders of magnitude terms, 7 out of 10 in pain for the knees, going down to about a 3 over 2 to 3 weeks for people who've been in severe chronic pain for the joints. The longer term version of that though, is that you're actually regrowing the cartilage and helping yourself build better tissue, helping yourself build longer lasting joints and making an investment in being able to move functionally longer, because when you have inflammation is a terrible scourge in our bodies and it doesn't stay local. It's, if you've had pounding your knees or knee injuries from skiing or from football or from, tennis or whatever sport, I've done the same thing grappling. I've torn my meniscus and I've had long-term chronic inflammation in the knee that I couldn't deal with because there just wasn't anything out there to be able to really treat that. You now have an option for being able to reduce that inflammation. And again, that's not just impacting that local joint tissue. One of the things that we've seen coming out of the literature, and again, it's really not commonly known, is that this inflammation actually has regional and systemic level impacts as well. And so as an example, one of the things that we've been doing with some NFL players that we work with is measuring those who've had ACL tear and ACL surgery. And you'll see the tissue in the quad above that be 1.5 to 2 degrees colder, even 5 or 6 years after the injury. And they've rehabbed it and they've done their work to make this happen. But what's happening is that inflammation is trickling out of the knee and impairing the blood delivery in that region. And the second piece of this that's even scarier is 10 years on, there was a very large study on NFL players. We didn't run this study, but it's a very telling one. And we have run some studies on this subject since then to kind of delineate what are the mediating factors for this. The ACL tears for NFL players in a 3,500 player study increased mortality by cardiovascular disease within the next 10 years by 50%.
Oof.
And that's Yeah, that's already taking like, so this isn't something where they haven't been able to rehab the knee and they're not moving as much, or they're not, they're still moving, they're still training, but it's the inflammation. And what it's come down to with the studies we've had since then, and not just us, there's a number of different groups looking into this space, but the cardiovascular tissue is actually losing shear strength resistance. And so shear strength is one of the metrics they use for, as blood's going through your blood vessels, it's going at a kind of a perpendicular to the tissue, how much pressure that puts on, and how much the flexibility or elasticity of the cardiovascular tissue and the robustness of the tissue allows it to withstand is called the shear strength. And what we see is that when people have this local inflammation, it trickles through the rest of the body and causes really, really damaging long-term impacts. And so, again, if we can get people away from taking the batteries out of the fire alarm and really get them into a place where they have a fire extinguisher to go put this fire out, it's not just going to make a big difference on the local knee tissue. It's going to make a lifelong difference. And that's our real goal for this, is to provide people with a systemically beneficial outcome relative to what they have from pharmaceuticals.
Awesome. Awesome. I want to jump into the commercial opportunities here in a minute, but I guess a couple more follow, like just pulling back for a second. When I look at I guess, this is more of a laser therapy, right? Red light, but laser specifically. What about like red light therapies? They're having a moment, right? Especially with this wellness boom that we're seeing. A lot of places are, people are getting red light saunas. You can go to, see a local gym here, just went from a fitness gym to a wellness place, right? So everybody's jumping on the wellness bandwagon, and red light therapies tend to be, and even consumer goods. Like I was telling you about, I had one of those Jew panels. So, is there a correlation between what you guys do and kind of these more, mainstream red light therapies? Yeah. Explain the differences.
So how we kind of think about the red light panels is that LEDs are easier to design around. They're more of a commodity product. They require less sophisticated engineering, and they require less regulatory. So this is going to be what's the volume in the space from a kind of how people are introduced to red light therapy. The downside for these is that LEDs emit light in what's called a Lambertian pattern. So they're essentially dye that emit light in all directions that get packaged into a small cup or an electrical component that can go on a PCB that are called PLCC packages in most cases. That restrains that 360-degree emission back into 120 degrees. It's when you're dosing with a panel, the downside is if the emission is very wide. So if you're treating things like skin level, if you want to have more type 2 collagen and have less wrinkles, as an example, it's a good anti-aging treatment. There are a couple of other wound healing. There's another great application for this. So if you have a cut on your arm and you want it to heal faster, there's amazing data on this type of thing from a wound healing standpoint. What it doesn't do though is penetrate like laser light. Laser light is what they call collimated. So it's very direct and essentially in a line. So there's two things about how we approach this that are a little bit different than the panels. One is we're using lasers, so the penetration internally is going to be better. And two is that we made it wearable so that it's at the skin level so that our dosing models are more effective. When you're trying to build dosing models for how photons act within tissue, and you have any kind of space between the emitter and the skin, it's extremely difficult to, so just as an aside, a small branch off for this, the reason that dosing is so important is that your body responds to light like it does to pharmaceuticals on what they call a biphasic dose curve or an Arndt-Schultz curve, which is essentially a sine wave that the more that you're taking of either this dosing of light or of pharmaceuticals, the better the outcomes are until you reach an apex, and then it goes back down. And with the pharmaceuticals, it goes way back down below zero. With the light, it goes back down to zero. So getting the dosing correct is very important. And there's something called the inverse root square law, where they've done a very good job of explaining this with a fun YouTube video that I can send you a link for. But essentially, think about shooting butter at toast. If you're trying to cover the toast and you have a butter gun and it sprays it out,
like if you are, yeah, the butter gun sounds amazing.
This is the most intuitive way I've found about talking about the inverse root square law. So if you're 2 inches from, if the butter gun has kind of a 2 inch distance from the toast, then it hits it and you're completely covered. If you're 2 inches back, you can now cover four toasts. Or if you're 6 inches back or 8 inches back, you're covering the whole wall. So like the difference in dosing from a photon delivery standpoint with the panels relative to treating at the skin level is very difficult to manage and is non-optimal. With that said, we would much prefer to see people using panels than nothing. It's a way, like it's kind of what we think of as a first generation product, because it's easier to deliver, it's easier to design. You strap a bunch of LEDs to a board and it's going to get people some, it's not going to likely get them to the apex of a dosing standpoint, but it's going to get them something above zero. And that's still better than kind of turning to pharmaceuticals for which is likely going to leave you below zero.
And you mentioned it earlier. And I'm just curious because I live up here, pretty far north. Winters are gray, but seasonal affective disorder, is red light therapy a solid remedy for that, or an option to fight that?
What I've seen is the most effective versions of those are certain blends of white. So white's a blend of a lot of different colors. There's certain reds that you need in that blend that correlate actually with sunrise. There's different, because of how light comes through the atmosphere, you get more red in the mornings. And so you can build those in, and there are some very good white products that are white LED emission products that are used for seasonal affective disorder. We joke, our head of research
like
is
the spurting lamp.
Yes,
Like the spurting lamp, the vitamin D.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we joke. Our head of research, who's just starting as a PhD candidate, he's a very smart young man, but he's up in Finland. And we're like, we got to send you at least 3 or 4 of those, because it is dark up there a lot of the year.
Yeah, it's pretty great here. And so anecdotally, right, I've been using the panel for about red light panel for 2 or 3 months, but it sounds like I need to step up my game here after talking to you, Forrest. Generally by January here in Northwest Montana, I will get some sneaking depression, right? It just kind of comes in, but I'm aware of it now. After the first couple of years here, I was like, why am I just bummed out, But I have noticed, like, I haven't, almost none of it, since I started using it. So that's got to be something. I also have a Spurty vitamin D lamp, but I think it's tough. We talk about all the benefits of vitamin D and sunshine nowadays, and with all the, like, the Huberman effect of all these wellness podcasts and outlets where people are starting to learn about it. But it's hard for people who live in northern climates to get this optimal, right, lifestyle of everything. So yeah, I'm always curious about that. Of course, let's talk about the commercial opportunity. So you guys are doing a direct to consumer, is that right? Or do you have a B2B model? Tell me how you're going to the market, and maybe just give us some insights into, like, how long the business has been around. Did you guys raise money? Are you bootstrapping this? Like, how are you what's the strategy for going to market and all of those businessy things?
Great question. We started the company about 3 years ago. We delivered our first products. It's for both my partner and myself. We had built B2B companies before, but it's our first direct consumer brand. And so to be able to understand to build a community and understand and interact with them more effectively, we went to market with the first product through Indiegogo campaign. So the crowdfunding was great. We had a really exciting time kind of sitting down. I think we totally met with 100 different potential users, many of whom end up being users, to understand how they thought about their pain, what kind of language they used, and what we could do to be able, from a product design standpoint, to be able to help them build habits in a meaningful way, because it really is the consistency of use that's going to drive the best outcomes with the device. So I want to say October 2021, we launched the product. August of 2022, we started delivering. And since then, we've delivered almost 20,000, so 18 or 19,000 devices worldwide. And it's just been scaling kind of year on year. And we didn't, with our unusual take on building the business and really not focusing on the commercial outcome, we wanted to avoid taking on heavy investment early, kind of from VC or private equity. And so we offered our community an opportunity to invest in, and we've taken on $500,000 through a crowdfunding an equity crowdfunding raise. And we're right now, aside from that, essentially bootstrapped. We're delivering a couple thousand devices a month right now. It's been growing very, very well. And we're seeing that, really it's having kind of a network effect of people using this, seeing good results, and then, telling their friends. And we see these kind of geographical blossoms around people and their use cases because of this. We are kicking off a B2B, what we're calling our medical professional reseller network this year. We weren't planning on doing this, and we actually had to be slapped in the face around 100 times to really take note of it. But what happened was we started testing with this last October, based on around 100 different medical practitioners had written in or called us and said, I'm a orthopedic surgeon, I'm a chiropractor, but I'm also a triathlete, and I have this repetitive stress injury like patellar tendonitis. I got great results from using your devices, so I bought 5 for my clinic. And how do my patients now want to buy them? How do we work together? So having been slapped in the face with that, 100 times, we started building out a beta test for it, and it performed way better than we expected. And so one of the things that we noticed with this was that we have 3 different groups that we find kind of ourselves connecting with, just kind of synergistically. Young performance-based athletes, and that's a lot of that's CrossFit and triathlons and NFL and NBA and this type of thing. And then middle-aged guys like me who would like to keep doing, and my wife gives me a hard time. I'm still playing rugby and CrossFit, which is likely the 2 things that are going to get you injured the most. But I'd like to keep doing those for the near future as long as possible. And so we find ourselves connecting with those that cohort very well. One of the things we've never been able to do from a digital marketing standpoint is connect in and tell our story to people who are older, so 55 plus, and have osteoarthritis or chronic pain. They don't like being targeted digitally from a marketing standpoint, but what they do like is, and they become flag waving users, is if they go into their doctor and the doctor says, try this, and they can try it and see the results in clinic, then they buy. And it's been, it's the only way that we found, and I think that's going to be a large bulk of what we find from a purchase kind of journey standpoint, is that we're not going to sell online to these kind of older cohorts. They're going to see, they're the kind of show me cohort. They're older. They don't want to hear about the story. They don't want to watch the YouTube video. They want to see it work. And so when they see it work, they go in, they buy, and they tell their friends. And it's been amazing, the results that we've seen through our medical practitioners today.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I would imagine like sports performance centers would be an interesting option for you guys too, right? I mean, there's a lot of athlete rehab, and I mean, just recovery as a category right now is just so popular for good reason, right? I mean, it's something in the United States we've been lagging behind other countries globally, and for so long is like we train, but no one talks about recovery. And finally, recovery is having a moment. But yeah, imagine sports performance. Are you getting some intakes on CrossFit? Makes a ton of sense. I mean, CrossFitters will buy anything to keep CrossFit, right? I know from personal experience.
Yeah, I same.
So sports performance.
Sports performance is great. I think 2 of the things that I should mention relative to sports performance that we've tracked and measured that are super interesting from kind of a strength and conditioning coaches or kind of PTs and physios is performance. So muscle recovery. So if you're doing really intense, heavy workouts, one of the things that limits you from coming back and training effectively for the adaptations that you'd like to make, whether it's hypertrophy or strength or power or whatever you're training for, is the muscle inflammation that you trigger by way of this exercise. And so, one of the things we hear about this quite a lot is, if I'm not triggering muscle inflammation, am I going to reduce or remove the amount of adaptation for strength and hypertrophy that I'm going to see? And it's actually the opposite direction. So 2 of the things that we measure for this are C-reactive proteins and creatinine kinase, which are 2 commonly measured muscle inflammatory markers. And we reduce, and I always get them backwards, but we reduce one by over 60% and one by over 80% overnight. And so, meaning, and how that presents, for me from a training standpoint, so it also reduces delayed onset muscle soreness, and that's really nice as well. But a lot of times the professional athletes are looking more at the performance benefits than they are necessarily at the soreness, which they've kind of written into their journey. But for me, if I go do a lot of front rack lunges, as an example, it's kind of hips and quad strengthening. You go do 200 front rack lunges in a day. You don't think, you're going to be sore. You're triggering real significant muscle inflammation in the three largest muscles in your body. And when you can reduce that delayed onset of muscle soreness, but also when you can reduce the time that it takes you to recover from this and to get back into training, these strength and conditioning coaches are loving it. They have a hard time. Some of the guys who are strength and conditioning coach for the Washington Commanders, as an example, loves laser therapy. He'd love to have his guys in a bed, doing something with this. He'd love to have them on some of the clinical level devices, which they have in their facilities. It's hard to get people into that from a day-to-day consistency. And so what he found is when he gets the guys in for tape, to watch tape with them, and he'll just strap everybody on with the Move Plus and make sure that they are recovering better from these really intense workouts that they're doing, because it allows them, it's almost like a performance enhancing drug from an outcome standpoint. You could actually just go through your power and strength increase curves that much faster because you're recovering that much faster.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm looking at the product itself. I mean, is there like, describe the product line? I mean, is there one product for like every joint in the body, or like how are you guys laying out the product line?
It is, and just to kind of give an idea from a visual standpoint, here's the so it's a strap system that we've put on with 3 modules that come with the standard product, and it does work for. We have an extender module here that I don't have with me that can extend it around your body, so you can kind of put these down towards minimal distance between each other. And I, for example, use it every day on my lower back and my gut for gut health. It's really nice, and actually, it's one of the things that, well, with the
gut health, seasonal
really, yes. It's our next product. This actually already makes a big difference. I use it. The 808 nanometer makes a big difference from an inflammation standpoint in your gut, and also triggers dopamine signaling. There's a couple of different clinical and academic teams that are looking at applying that to Parkinson's and seeing very good results relative to treating the gut for Parkinson's because of the dopamine gap that you have with Parkinson's. For me, I just feel better on a daily basis. I've long-term CrossFitter, and I'm 6'3", and so my lower back with the amount of Olympic lifting and deadlifts it's not fantastic. At least once every other month, and I found that just treating every day the lower back tissue for pain and inflammation keeps me healthier longer. And if I do tweak something, because I'm kind of getting to my ego with the lifting, then it gets me back into lifting a lot faster as well. Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's hard. It's hard not to.
Yeah. And 6'3" isn't the best frame for CrossFit either. So yeah. So it's guys like are 5'6", 5'7", right? Short arms, long torsos. Anyway, right. Yeah. So you got a lot of. So you got CrossFit is really popular. I'm just looking at your website too. Like you have some of the biggest names. I mean, Brooke Wells, Sarah Sigmundsdottir. Like these are a big deal. I mean, where do you think? I mean, you mentioned the the practitioner angle on the B2B side, but where do you see the biggest markets, maybe for 2024 that you guys are targeting, or you think have the biggest opportunity?
I think the medical practitioner ones, we all of us as founders, particularly Tom and myself, our parents are in their 70s. And one of the reasons we really like this, A, the concept of the mission of the company, but B, this technology, is that we can really make an impact, not just for ourselves and extending out our kind of ability to go CrossFit or play rugby, but it also makes a huge impact from a lifestyle standpoint, from a quality of life standpoint for the older cohorts. And we've been, it was frustrating to try to address those markets and have them completely dismiss the digital marketing side. And so we've been so excited to be able to work with our medical practitioners. And I've actually gone in and do some clinic level visits with these guys. And like the stories that you hear back from these patients, it's exactly why we're at work every day. Like this is why it's a mission driven company. Like you building any small business, you get beat up. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of friction to kind of reverse the inertia that's existing. And finding the energy to do that can be difficult sometimes. But we come into work and you see these stories from people, and you hear these stories directly from people in these clinics, and it's life changing. It's just I can't get out of bed fast enough to go do what we needed to do to make that happen. So for me, that's the most exciting is these older cohorts being able to actually take this on and adopt it. is just super powerful.
Right on, man. Oh, good. I feel your excitement. I like, uh, what you mentioned, you alluded to it earlier as far as like product extension. You mentioned like a gut one, but what do you foresee as like, what are some of the newer products that you're going to come out with in the next foreseeable future?
So I'll try to keep myself contained a little bit, but the product that I actually wanted to start the company with is a brain product that we can
Oh,
treat transcranially. And there are a number
mhm.
of neurological pathologies like ADHD, depression, chronic anxiety, bipolar, addiction, and then even longer term things like different flavors of dementia like Lewy body syndrome, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, where treatment is already been shown to be effective. But one of the things to take it back to our mission and where we're going to be going with this longer term is we have to hold ourselves accountable, not just for the number of people we get this to, but the measurement of how we're impacting their quality of life. And so one of the things we've been working on with our tech team is a spectroscopy based solution, which is essentially shooting lasers in and then measuring back out with sensors the interaction that light has had with tissue. And we have a really powerful system that we're building around how you can measure metabolic function or impairment in the brain. And when you can see where your brain uses or doesn't use energy very well with these different systems, whether it's, oxygen is one of the proxies we use, how your brain delivers oxygen, we can measure directly. Cytochrome C oxidase is an enzyme in the phospholipid bilayer of your mitochondria. That's a good measure for mitochondrial function. Lactate, there's a number of different systems that kind of overlap. Your brain, you never want your brain out of, if your arm runs out of energy for a little while, like you're kind of okay. If your brain runs out of energy, there's a ton of redundant systems in your brain. So long story short, we're kind of pulling together how to map all of those into these 3D pictures and then treat on an individualized basis around what area of the brain has this impairment and where we can impact it and how your body responds to that. And so essentially you have this 3D picture of before, during, short term, middle term, long term. And we won't be able to launch that until next year, but it is, for me, it's one of the most exciting technologies, not only that I've been involved in, but that I've seen in the last 20 years. It's going to really change people's
Wow.
lives.
Wow. Awesome, man. Well, the last question I always ask people on the show to Forrest is like, what do you need right now? When you're talking to, the community of fitness, health and wellness, industry professionals, like what would you like to hear from people about and how would you like them to reach out to you?
Reach out. One of the things that my partner Tom and I kind of took on as a commitment to, to our mission of really not just trying to shift products, but trying to help people change their lives is if people are not getting what they want out of this, or if they have questions about the technology or whatever, we have both of our Calendlies available publicly, so that if you have a problem with the product, or if you have a problem that would keep you from buying it or adopting it, call us. This is something that we're happy to jump on a call with you and talk about. And I don't know
Cool.
how many more years we can keep that up, because it is ramping up in the number of calls we're getting in for it. But the what we really need is, let's start talking more about what the limitations are for this current system of pharmaceuticals, and let's make people aware of what they're losing and what they're putting themselves at risk because of these pharmaceuticals. And then let's talk about what we can do to fill the gap to take it into a more manageable long-term solution that's going to provide better results for everyone. I really, that's if we could ask for everyone kind of to, just read more about this, contact us about it, tell us how we can make that more digestible and palatable for anyone who needs that kind of pain relief or has chronic pain. That's what we're here for. So, again, however we can engage to support that, I'm happy to do it. But yeah, that's getting the education out is the big ask.
Yeah. Yeah. Education comes first, man. It's great. It's a great market approach. And for people listening, so the website is kineon.io. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. I mean, I feel your excitement. I love that we just geeked out on red light therapy for, 45 minutes. That was really fun. Really dispelled some things, myths that were swimming around my head. So really appreciate it. And yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Forrest Smith.
Thank you so much, Eric. Really appreciate it.